With the theme of that report by Des and Tathia, police still on very high alert over fears of counterattacks. For more on this, I'm joined by Professor Mary de Haas from the University of KZN. Prof, always a pleasure speaking to you. I always enjoy our conversations. You've been actively involved in monitoring violence research in KZN since the 1980s, and this is not at all to try and draw comparisons on violent incidents, but where does this sit for someone with your experience?
Sorry, where does
this sit as far as the violence we've seen compared to the years you've studied?
Look, obviously the dynamics in terms of the context are very different. But I think what this has done relative to the earlier violence is heightened tensions between different communities. It's polarized people. There's been a lot of stuff floating around, on messages, which have actually made people even more worried because it exaggerates. In some areas, I'm talking now about kind of middle-class urban areas, they kind of hear reports that are actually exaggerations. But the exaggerations are not there for people like those people living in Phoenix because they are very vulnerable. I think you've explored that whole issue, how it happened, and the important thing now is to rebuild those relationships and the way you do that is with justice, with dialogue, but justice especially because the victims of the, and of course also a clean-up of the security industry because part of the problem is allegedly serious abuses by security companies.
Yeah.
So, that's the only way, but there's those parallels because, when it happened in the 80s, for example, it was deliberately instigated against Indian communities to drive them out of an area very near Phoenix so they could incorporate the land into KwaZulu. And I think what you find in these situations is that neighbours, black and Indian, etc., are getting along just fine, and then some deliberate instigation comes in, the nature of which is different to the 1980s, and that often the different races will help each other, as in the 80s when African people actually sheltered Indian people, neighbours, when vigilantes were sent in by the apartheid regime.
Can we talk a little bit, if it's okay with you, Prof, about this concern around the counterattacks that the police say they now fear? And I want to bring in the word intelligence into this. It seemingly failed us before all of this began a few weeks ago, but now they're saying there's concerns around counterattacks. Are you able to weigh in on that?
Look, I think they've seen stuff on social media about, enough is enough. There was one particularly provocative video of people who apparently, this is just an allegation, but it's possible because the area, Phoenix is known for its drug mafias and their wars. And the people in this video who were deliberately racially profiling black people as they drove around were possibly, some of the drug mafia people. That's possible. Now, the were fears, that led me to actually on Monday this week to writing to the provincial commissioner, sending him some of this stuff, asking urgently for an investigation into what was happening, including why the police hadn't acted initially, because don't forget, when this started, the police should have brought in public order policing. For starters, with a big water cannon, that would have helped a lot. I don't know where these water cannons were. I don't know where public order policing, where the municipalities' famous and infamous Caspers were in all of this. Okay, so I wanted these issues raised. I wanted an investigation into all these killings, including an investigation into the alleged action of security companies taking the law into their own hands, pointing out that people use security companies, they provide very important services, but those security companies must work with the police must have records, the police must monitor their activities. So one questions the role of the police at the beginning of this. And as a result of that, somebody circulated my letter on WhatsApp or whatever, and the regulatory body have sent down a senior inspector to investigate those allegations.
No.
So I think that there is a very real threat. I don't know if it's coming from intelligence, because my own experience is that there's very little intelligence coming out of this province, but it may come out in the form of very overt posts on, for example, Twitter, WhatsApp, those social media posts, because definitely I was alarmed. I did a letter very quickly because I thought any day now we're going to get that sort of retaliation. And we're not out of the woods. We're not out of the woods with any of this, including more mob behaviour, as we've seen 2 weeks ago, because my information is that the plotting is continuing. They haven't finished yet.
Why do you think the plotting for what? Prof, I'm actually so glad you asked that, because some people are saying this was poverty crime, others are saying politically motivated, others are saying opportunistic. Where do you land on this?
I believe there are different layers. I mean, the man who's been arrested, Mqunu, was inciting. He was inciting in the Shap area in Durban. Right. Now, I don't think inciters will publicly broadcast the fact that they're part of a plan carried out with almost military precision, targeting not just Durban. I mean, not just Durban, but if you go to rural areas, small towns like Bulwer, Copa, Richmond, they're being cleaned out. High flats. There was a coordination here that couldn't have come without planning. Now, I mean, and look, there have been threats, public threats, later on when there's more court issues, that there's going to be, the ANC is overtly mobilising to protest, again, in favour of Zuma. That movement is still there. Now, I'm saying this because if you don't identify the people who actually set this whole thing in motion behind the scenes, and look, forget about it only being poor people, because obviously, they were drawn into it. The stories have been being taken in, busted, which I'm still trying to check out because that's quite important. But you don't get from a rural area to a shopping district in a small town without being bussed or taxied in. Okay, so somebody brings people in, you get a kind of mob mentality taking over after the destruction has started. The people who started the destruction are out of the way.
Yeah.
But don't forget, some of them came in fancy cars. Some of them looted very expensive goods. You can't eat television sets, you can't. And of course the liquor. I mean, the liquor was, that huge quantities taken. Now, you need transport for that. Poor people rely on taxis. They don't have the cars and the trucks to remove all this stuff.
So Professor, what you're saying, Prof, is that there was just a lot of coordination behind this. I think I don't think many people are surprised to hear an expert like you say that. I think more concerning is that you think this is not necessarily the end of this. But, Prof, I'm going to have to leave you there for now, but I've got a feeling you and I are going to speak again very soon. What a pleasure it always is. Professor Mary de Haas from the University of KZN, been following and monitoring violence in KZN since the 1980s. She's a well-recognized researcher on the subject from the University of KwaZulu-Natal.